got an insatiable appetite for life, and I want more.
Vince McMahon is arguably one of the most influential figures in the world of professional wrestling. Over several decades, he transformed what was once a niche, regional entertainment business into a global multimedia empire. As the chairman and CEO of World Wrestling Entertainment, WWE, McMahon shaped the careers of countless wrestling legends and crafted some of the most memorable storylines in wrestling history. But for all his success and contributions to sports entertainment, Vince McMahon's legacy is marred by numerous controversies that WWE would prefer to sweep under the rug. Many of these controversies stretch far beyond the fictional world of wrestling storylines and bleed into real-life scandals, involving issues like sexual misconduct, criminal accusations, and unethical business practices. Here are 19 Vince McMahon controversies that WWE would rather the world forget. Before we go into our explanation, we have a very small request. If you like our content, please support us by subscribing to our channel. This is a small click for you, but for us it means a lot. Thank you. Let's begin.
That Stephanie gets pregnant. And I think I was the one.
Vince's creepy pitch. Stephanie McMahon's pregnancy twist. One of the most unsettling stories in WWE history revolves around Vince McMahon's idea to involve his daughter, Stephanie McMahon, in an incestuous storyline. In 2006, Vince allegedly pitched a storyline to be featured on WWE's flagship shows like Monday Night Raw or SmackDown, where his character would be revealed as the father of Stephanie's unborn child. And if that wasn't already shocking enough, another version of the idea suggested that her real-life brother, Shane McMahon, could be the father instead. The whole thing was meant to create shock value and push boundaries of what was considered to be acceptable on television, something Vince was known for, especially during the wild days of the Attitude Era. It's so hard to even imagine how uncomfortable this must have been for Stephanie. Understandably, she was horrified and immediately shut down the idea. In interviews, she's talked about how disturbing and uncomfortable it was for her to even hear her father suggest something like this. It's one of those moments where you have to wonder, what was Vince thinking? Really makes you wonder how many other wild ideas were floated and never saw the light of day.
With a man who runs the World Wrestling Federation. Charge, illegal distribution of steroids.
The infamous steroid trial. In 1993, Vince McMahon was put on trial after being accused of distributing steroids to WWE wrestlers. During the late 1980s and early 1990s, steroid use was widespread in WWE because McMahon wanted his wrestlers to have larger-than-life, superhuman bodies that fit his vision of sports entertainment. The situation became serious when Dr. George Zahorian, a physician who worked closely with WWE, was arrested. Zahorian was found to have given steroids to 37 WWE wrestlers, and the prosecution's case largely relied on the testimony of the former WWE physician, who claimed to have distributed steroids to wrestlers with McMahon's knowledge. Even Hulk Hogan, one of the WWE's biggest stars, took the stand. He admitted to using steroids for over a decade, but he denied ever getting them directly from McMahon. Another former wrestler, Kevin Nails Washels, testified that McMahon was the one who told him to use steroids. However, his credibility was doubted because he had a personal grudge against McMahon, having been fired after a backstage fight, and as a result, the jury did not find his testimony reliable. The trial lasted for weeks, capturing the attention of the media and the wrestling world. Ultimately, McMahon was cleared of the charges, but the impact of the trial still lingers. If McMahon had been found guilty, he could have ended up in prison, and WWE might have collapsed. When Vince McMahon faked his own death on live TV. In June 2007, Vince McMahon stunned WWE fans with one of the strangest and most controversial storylines ever. After losing his Mr. McMahon Appreciation Night on Monday Night Raw, Vince walked out to his limousine, stepped inside, and moments later the car exploded on live TV. They wanted people to think he died in the blast, and the plan was to turn it into a huge mystery about who was behind it. WWE even put out a statement on their website saying Vince was presumed dead, trying to make it seem as real as possible. The storyline was supposed to play out over weeks, with different WWE superstars being involved, and an ongoing investigation into the death. It was a whole big dramatic move meant to keep fans hooked, but just a few days later, the whole thing had to be scrapped because of a real-life tragedy involving Chris Benoit, which we'll get into later. Vince had to come back on TV, drop the storyline, and address the real situation. What's funny is that it's not even the first time Vince considered killing off his character. A couple of years before this, in 2005, there was a plan for him to die in a plane crash, but that idea was also scrapped.
Strangled his wife and smothered their 7-year-old son, and then hanged himself.
The tragic story of Chris Benoit and his family. The Chris Benoit tragedy is still one of the darkest moments in WWE history. In June 2007, Benoit, who was one of the most respected wrestlers in the industry, shocked the world when he killed his wife Nancy and their 7-year-old son Daniel before taking his own life. The news was devastating, and nobody saw it coming. At first, WWE aired a special tribute to Benoit, not knowing the full details of what had happened. But once the truth came out about the double murder and suicide, WWE quickly distanced itself from him. They erased his name from their history, removed all mention of him from their website, and made sure he wouldn't be remembered in any of their future programming. It was clear WWE did not want to be associated with the horrific crime. Later, it was discovered that Benoit had serious brain damage from years of head trauma. His brain showed signs of chronic traumatic encephalopathy, CTE, which is a condition caused by repeated concussions, and as a wrestler, Benoit was known for his hard-hitting, aggressive style, which likely contributed to the repeated concussions over the years. In fact, doctors said his brain looked like that of an 85-year-old Alzheimer's patient, which was shocking for someone his age. There were also steroids found in Benoit's system, sparking talk about steroid use in wrestling again. While it's not clear if the drugs had anything to do with what happened, it did raise concerns about the mental and physical toll wrestling takes on its stars. The tragedy also brought to light that Benoit's wife, Nancy, who was known to fans as Woman, had filed for divorce a few years earlier, claiming domestic abuse, although they reconciled later. Recently in the Netflix docuseries, Vince McMahon commented on how much the whole incident affected his business and the hit WWE took rather than Benoit as a person, or how his career and possible drug use might have played into what happened.
Wrestling over new allegations of sexual harassment by top officials in the sport.
The hush money scandal that brought Vince McMahon down. In 2022, Vince McMahon got caught up in a huge scandal when it was revealed that he paid $12 million to 4 women over 16 years to keep quiet about allegations of sexual misconduct. Some of these women even worked for WWE or had other ties to the company. One of the most talked about cases involved a former WWE paralegal who received $3 million in hush money after allegedly having an affair with McMahon. There were also reports that a former wrestler was paid after she claimed McMahon pressured her into sexual acts, and when she refused later on, her contract was not renewed. This scandal kicked off a big internal investigation, and it was found that Vince had been using his own money to make these payments. But there were also concerns about whether he might have used company funds to cover some of these expenses. That raised even more red flags, and made the whole thing even messier, especially since it could have impacted WWE's finances. Because of all the attention and pressure, Vince had to step down as WWE's CEO and chairman. But even though he officially stepped down, it was clear he still had a lot of control behind the scenes. And even after all the drama, McMahon stepped back into his position in 2023.
WWE superstar Ashley Massaro was allegedly drugged and raped by multiple...
Ashley Massaro's heartbreaking rape cover-up. Ashley Massaro, a former WWE star and Diva Search winner, shared a heartbreaking story about being sexually assaulted during a WWE-sponsored trip to Kuwait in 2006. She claims she was drugged and raped by military personnel while visiting troops, as part of WWE's Tribute to the Troops event. What makes it even worse is that after she told WWE officials, including Vince McMahon, about what happened, she said they pressured her to keep quiet. WWE reportedly did not want to damage its relationship with the military, so they encouraged her not to go public or take any legal action, leaving her to deal with the trauma on her own. In 2019, after her tragic death, a previously sealed affidavit came out where Massaro described the assault in detail and how WWE's response made her feel abandoned. She also mentioned that other female stars faced harassment and mistreatment in the company. Her story not only revealed the terrible way WWE handled her situation, but also raised questions about how women were treated behind the scenes. WWE denied the accusations, but Massaro's story is a sad reminder of how victims can be silenced.
Suit is alleging that Vince McMahon sexually abused and trafficked a former employee.
The sexual trafficking allegations against Vince McMahon. In 2022, Vince McMahon faced serious allegations of human trafficking, adding to his growing list of scandals. These claims were brought forward by Janelle Grant, a former spa manager who alleged that McMahon and WWE executives were involved in trafficking women for sexual purposes. She filed a lawsuit for the same, and honestly, these accusations came at the worst possible time for McMahon, who was already dealing with the hush money sexual misconduct scandals we spoke about earlier at the same time. This added fuel to the fire of public scrutiny, and further damaged his already shaky reputation. Now, even though this particular civil case has not yet been fully resolved in the courts, the damage to Vince's image has already been done.
I was forced into oral sex with Vince McMahon?
The rape allegation that came back to haunt Vince McMahon. Rita Chatterton, WWE's first female referee, came forward in 1992 with serious allegations against Vince McMahon, claiming that he raped her in 1986. According to Chatterton, the incident occurred in Vince's limousine after a WWE event. She said that McMahon had been pressuring her to have sex for some time, and one night, after driving her around, he pulled the limo over, unzipped his pants, and demanded that she perform oral sex. When she refused, McMahon allegedly forced himself on her and raped her in the back of the limousine. In her own words, Chatterton recalled, "He got all over me. I was scared. I didn't know what to do. He started pulling off my jeans. I was terrified." She continued, saying that she felt like she had no way out of the situation. "There was no way I was going to be able to get out of that car." Chatterton's story was initially made public in 1992, but no legal action was taken because the statute of limitations had expired. WWE and McMahon denied the allegations at the time, and the case eventually faded from public attention for years. When all the other sexual misconduct allegations we spoke about today came out against Vince McMahon, this case resurfaced too, and the story gained even more traction recently thanks to the Netflix docuseries. In the documentary, McMahon made a disturbing comment about the incident, downplaying the severity of the situation by implying that if something had happened, it was consensual, but this had only added to the backlash he's already facing. The mysterious death linked to WWE legend Jimmy Snuka. One of the most troubling stories in WWE history involves wrestling legend Jimmy Superfly Snuka and the mysterious death of his girlfriend Nancy Argentino back in 1983. Snuka was one of the WWE's biggest stars at the time, but things took a tragic turn on May 10, 1983, when Nancy was found unresponsive in their hotel room in Allentown, Pennsylvania. She was rushed to the hospital, but unfortunately she did not survive. She was just 23 years old. The autopsy revealed that Nancy died from traumatic brain injuries, and she had several cuts and bruises on her body, hinting at possible past abuse. The medical examiner even suggested her death looked like a homicide and recommended a full investigation. But despite these findings, no charges were ever filed back then. Snuka's explanation of what happened that night kept changing. At first, he said Nancy had slipped and fallen when they stopped by the side of the road for her to use the bathroom. But over the years, his story shifted, which only made people more suspicious. Despite this, and Nancy's family pushing for answers, the case went cold for over 30 years. Many people believe that Snuka's celebrity status helped him avoid charges at the time. The case was reopened in 2013 after a newspaper article brought attention back to it. In 2015, more than 30 years after Nancy's death, Snuka was finally charged with third-degree murder and involuntary manslaughter. However, by this time, Snuka's health had severely declined, and he was found unfit to stand trial. He passed away in 2017, never facing justice for the crime. There have been rumors about Vince McMahon's involvement. McMahon reportedly went with Snuka to meet with the police after Nancy's death, and many speculate that McMahon helped Snuka avoid charges back then. While nothing has been proven, it's a story that continues to follow the WWE and Snuka's legacy. The Saudi Arabia controversy that haunts WWE. In 2018, WWE entered a 10-year partnership with the Saudi government, putting on big events like Crown Jewel and Super Showdown. The deal was worth hundreds of millions of dollars, but it caused a lot of controversy because of Saudi Arabia's poor human rights record. Things got even worse in 2018 when journalist Jamal Khashoggi was killed at the Saudi consulate in Turkey, allegedly ordered by the Saudi government. This happened just weeks before the WWE was supposed to hold the Crown Jewel event in Riyadh, and people were outraged, with many calling for WWE to cancel the show. Even US senators urged Vince McMahon to back out. Despite all the backlash, WWE went ahead with the event. Stars like John Cena and Daniel Bryan refused to participate, but the show still went on, which got WWE a ton of criticism. The Saudi deal was part of Saudi Arabia's Vision 2030 plan, a way for the country to reshape its global image. While it helped WWE expand into a new market and make serious money, a lot of people saw it as sports washing, which means using sports to cover up the country's human rights issues. In 2023, when Vince McMahon returned to WWE after stepping down over sexual misconduct allegations, rumors started flying that he was considering selling WWE to Saudi Arabia's public investment fund. This freaked out a lot of fans, worried that WWE would go private under Saudi control, tightening the company's ties to a controversial regime. Wrestlers still don't get healthcare thanks to Vince. A big issue that has followed Vince McMahon and WWE for years is how they handle healthcare for their wrestlers. Even though wrestling is incredibly tough on the body, WWE classifies its wrestlers as independent contractors and not as employees. Because of this, WWE does not provide health insurance or full benefits, leaving wrestlers to cover their own medical costs. In a 2017 interview, Linda McMahon tried to use this technical loophole to defend their setup, and she argued that wrestlers are free to secure their own insurance if they want to, and that WWE cannot be expected to provide coverage for in-ring injuries. Wrestlers such as Jesse Ventura and John Oliver have been vocal critics of WWE's healthcare policy, arguing that McMahon has failed to provide adequate support for the performers, who have to help build his empire, and fans stand by this too. In response to these criticisms, WWE has pointed to its wellness program, which was implemented in 2006 after the death of Eddie Guerrero, who passed away due to heart failure linked to years of drug abuse. The wellness program includes regular drug testing and offers some support for wrestlers dealing with addiction or mental health issues, but many feel like that's not enough given the risks involved in professional wrestling. Owen Hart's death, how WWE mishandled a tragedy. On May 23, 1999, Owen Hart, performing as the Blue Blazer character, was set to descend from the rafters of Kansas City's Kemper Arena during the Over the Edge pay-per-view. But the harness he was wearing malfunctioned, and Owen fell over 70 feet into the ring. Tragically, he did not survive. Even though this was a major, heartbreaking accident, WWE decided to keep the event going. While Owen was being rushed to the hospital, the show continued, which has led to a lot of criticism over the years about how Vince McMahon and WWE handled the situation. Fans in the arena and people watching at home didn't know how serious things were right away. But Owen was later pronounced dead at the hospital. The Hart family later filed a wrongful death lawsuit against WWE, which was eventually settled out of court. Owen's wife, Martha Hart, has been very outspoken about her anger towards WWE, accusing the company of negligence and failing to take proper safety precautions. Since then, she's distanced herself and their children from WWE and has also refused to allow Owen's legacy to be celebrated by WWE, preventing him from being inducted into the company's Hall of Fame. In the years following Owen's death, Martha created the Owen Hart Foundation, which supports things like education, healthcare, and housing for people in need, keeping his legacy alive in a positive way. His death remains one of the most heartbreaking moments in wrestling history. To this day, WWE is still criticized for how they handled things that night, and many believe the show should have been stopped immediately.
Like a dog, come on, tell me you're sorry.
The day Vince made Trish strip and bark like a dog. In 2001, Vince McMahon shocked WWE fans with a storyline that humiliated Trish Stratus on live TV. During an episode of Monday Night Raw, as a part of his affair storyline with Trish, while his on-screen wife, Linda McMahon, was in a coma, Vince ordered Trish to get on her hands and knees, strip down to her bra and panties, and bark like a dog in front of the audience. The whole scene was meant to show Vince's power and dominance, but it crossed so many lines. Trish, who was on her way to becoming one of WWE's biggest female stars, was reduced to a degrading position just for shock value. Trish later admitted in interviews that she was uncomfortable with the storyline, but felt like she could not say no because it was part of her job. Vince McMahon used the N-word on John Cena. Back in 2005, WWE had a super controversial and offensive moment that still follows Vince McMahon around. During a backstage segment at the Survivor Series pay-per-view, McMahon, in his Mr. McMahon character, used a racial slur in a scripted bit with John Cena, who happens to be one of the WWE's biggest stars ever, and at the time, he was also the face of the WWE, known for his never-give-up attitude and winning multiple WWE titles. The scene showed McMahon walking up to Cena, who was the face of the company at the time, and casually used the N-word like it was no big deal. Then he walked right past Booker T and his wife Sharmell, who looked shocked. This was supposed to be played off as a joke, but it was immediately criticized by fans in the media. McMahon's use of the racial slur, even in character, was considered way out of line, especially because WWE is such a huge global company. The fact that Booker T, an African-American wrestler, was left to awkwardly react only made the situation worse, and brought up a lot of uncomfortable racial dynamics. Recently in an interview, Cena was asked about the incident. He said the script was written that way, and he didn't think too much about it because he really wasn't aware of those issues at the time.
They are not good. The Blue Blazer, as we know as Owen Hart, was going to make a very spectacular...
WWE's worst skit, making fun of Jim Ross on air. Jim Ross, widely regarded as one of the best voices in wrestling, has been very open about his battle with Bell's palsy, a condition that causes partial paralysis of his face. For years, fans have respected Ross for continuing to work despite his illness, so when WWE decided to mock his condition on air, it didn't sit right with a lot of people. In 2005, during a segment on Raw, Vince McMahon and his son Shane took part in a skit where Vince dressed up as a doctor and pretended to perform surgery on a doll meant to represent Jim Ross. The entire bit dragged on, with McMahon making fun of Ross's appearance and his condition. Wrestling journalist Bill Apter even spoke out, calling the segment insulting, and fans agreed. People were upset that someone who had given so much to WWE was being made the butt of such a tasteless joke. Jim Ross stayed quiet about it for a while, but in later interviews, he admitted that he was hurt by the segment and how it was handled. It was one of those moments that just makes you shake your head and wonder why anyone thought it was a good idea.
Bret screwed Bret. I have no sympathy whatsoever for Bret.
Wrestling's biggest betrayal. The Montreal Screwjob. In November 1997, WWE shocked the wrestling world at Survivor Series with a twist that no one saw coming. It all went down during a match between Bret the Hitman Hart and Shawn Michaels. At the time, Bret was the WWE champion, but he had already signed a deal to leave WWE and head over to WCW, a rival wrestling company. Bret did not want to lose the title to Shawn Michaels in front of his home crowd in Canada. He and Vince McMahon had agreed that Bret would keep the title for the night and either give it up or lose it at a later event. But Vince had other ideas. During the match, Shawn put Bret in the sharpshooter, which is actually Bret's own signature move. Bret didn't tap out, but Vince, who was at ringside, suddenly ordered the referee to ring the bell and make it look like Bret had submitted. Bret was totally blindsided, and the crowd had no idea what was going on. This moment is known as the Montreal Screwjob because Bret got completely screwed out of the WWE Championship. Here's the kicker. Almost no one knew about the plan to screw Bret over. The referee, Earl Hebner, was told just before the match to call for the bell. Hebner later said he felt horrible about it, especially because Bret had trusted him. He even ran out of the arena right after the match because he was afraid of how Bret would react. Bret, as expected, was furious. He spat right in Vince's face in front of the live audience and punched him backstage, leaving Vince with a black eye. What's wild is that the Screwjob actually helped create the whole McMahon character, the evil boss persona, that Vince would play for years, especially during his famous feud with Stone Cold Steve Austin. This whole incident was the beginning of the Attitude Era and changed WWE forever.
Rights, I would like to inform you that you're fired!
Vince McMahon says, "I love firing people." In December 2021, Vince McMahon made another pretty controversial joke on Monday Night Raw when he said he loves firing people, especially right before Christmas. During a segment with Austin Theory, Vince casually said, "I love firing people. It gives me a warm feeling right here," while pointing to his chest. It was meant to fit his Mr. McMahon bad guy persona, but it rubbed a lot of people the wrong way, because in 2021 alone, WWE released over 80 wrestlers, supposedly due to budget cuts. This was not the first time Vince McMahon was called out over how he handled terminations. The most infamous example is probably how CM Punk got fired. Back in 2014, after Punk walked out of WWE due to burnout and backstage drama, he got his termination papers delivered to him. On the day of his wedding, Punk shared the whole story on Colt Cabana's Art of Wrestling podcast, explaining that he had texted Triple H about chatting after his honeymoon, but instead got a FedEx package with his firing papers on his wedding day. Vince later claimed on Stone Cold Steve Austin's podcast that it was all a coincidence and not intentional. He apologized, saying sometimes different departments in WWE don't communicate well, but Punk was not buying it. He rejected the apology and called it a publicity stunt, and pointed out that the papers were sent overnight, so it didn't feel like a mistake to him. Vince's legal trouble. Allegations of investor fraud. In 2020, Vince McMahon and WWE got hit with a bunch of class action lawsuits from some angry shareholders. These lawsuits claim that McMahon and WWE had been misleading investors about how well the company was doing, which caused the stock price to get inflated and left investors in a bad spot when things went downhill. One of the lawsuits from the firm Levi and Krasinski accused WWE of either making false statements or not sharing important information with investors, which led them to make poor financial decisions. Another lawsuit from Glancy, Prongay, and Murray pointed out that WWE blamed its drop-in live events and merchandise sales on injured wrestlers being out of action. But when those wrestlers returned and the ratings did not improve, WWE didn't come clean about what was really going on. This left investors feeling like they were kept in the dark. On top of that, a third major lawsuit was filed by Kessler, Topaz, Meltzer, and Czech, accusing WWE of breaking federal securities laws by not being honest with potential stockholders. So was this all just a case of bad communication, or was something more shady going on behind the scenes? How Vince McMahon crushed union hopes in WWE. Vince McMahon has always been quick to shut down any talk of forming a wrestlers' union in WWE, and one of the most well-known stories about this involves Jesse the Body Ventura. Back in the late 80s, Ventura tried to organize a union to help wrestlers get better pay, benefits, and rights, especially considering how physically brutal wrestling is. It seemed like a no-brainer for the wrestlers, who were taking a serious toll on their bodies, without the same protections other athletes were getting. Ventura's attempt came around the time of WrestleMania 2, and he got a bunch of wrestlers on board with the idea. But things did not go as planned, because Vince McMahon found out about it, and according to Ventura, Hulk Hogan, who was Vince McMahon's top guy and really close to him at the time, tipped Vince off about the union talks. Anyway, McMahon did not leave any room for debate. He made it clear to the wrestlers that he could either work without a union, or they would not be working for WWE at all. It was a classic my way or the highway moment, and unsurprisingly, the wrestlers backed down.
Basically, I had to make was whether or not the show goes on. The live audience didn't really see.
Marvelous verdict: the tarnished legacy of Vince McMahon. Vince McMahon's legacy is as messy as it gets. On one hand, he's a man responsible for turning WWE from a small-time wrestling promotion to a global entertainment giant, giving us some of the most iconic moments in wrestling history. Thanks to him, the sport became mainstream, and stars like Hulk Hogan, The Rock, and John Cena became household names. But on the flip side, McMahon's career is full of controversies that have cast a big shadow over everything he's built. He's been involved in all sorts of scandals, from questionable storylines to serious allegations of misconduct. He's been accused of exploiting wrestlers and even covering up crimes. It seems like for every great thing McMahon did for wrestling, there's a controversial moment that makes people question his decisions. At the end of the day, Vince McMahon's story is about more than just wrestling. It's about power, control, and how business and entertainment often collide. Don't you agree? If you liked our content, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe to us if you haven't already. Have a good one and be safe. Thanks, everyone.